What if I told you the terrifying nun from the Conjuring universe wasn't born entirely from Hollywood imagination? Sounds crazy, right? Because hidden deep inside a quiet English village, there once stood a house so disturbing, locals refused to walk past it after sunset. People claimed they heard footsteps echoing through empty hallways. Children ran away screaming after seeing a ghostly woman dressed as a nun. Paranormal investigators left convinced something was watching them. And even legendary demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren believed this place was unlike anything they'd ever experienced. This is the horrifying true story of Borley Rectory, the place many still call the most haunted house in England. And trust me, it only gets darker from here. Imagine driving through the peaceful countryside of southeastern England. Tiny cottages, old churches, fields stretching for miles. Everything looks calm, almost too calm. But tucked away in this quiet landscape was a building surrounded by whispers. A place where priests refused to stay, families packed up and fled, and every new resident seemed to leave with another terrifying story. No joke. People genuinely believed the house itself was alive. Not because of strange architecture, not because of old age, but because something inside refused to leave. For more than a century, Borley Rectory became the center of Britain's most infamous haunting. Even today, paranormal investigators still visit the ruins hoping to witness what countless others claim they saw. Some never return convinced it was all fake. Others leave believing they encountered something impossible. But here's where things get even creepier. Long before ghost hunters, long before cameras, long before horror movies ever existed, there was an old legend whispered by villagers. A story almost everyone dismissed, until the sightings began. According to local folklore, hundreds of years ago, a young monk secretly fell in love with a nun from a nearby convent. Back then, their relationship wasn't just forbidden. It was considered a betrayal against God himself. So the two lovers met only in secret, away from curious eyes, hoping no one would ever discover their relationship. But secrets never stay buried forever. Eventually, someone found out. The couple was dragged before church authorities. No mercy, no forgiveness, only judgment. And the punishment was beyond brutal. The monk was publicly executed. But what happened to the nun was even worse. Legend says she wasn't simply killed. She was sealed alive inside the walls. Imagine that for a second. Pitch black darkness. No way out. No food. No water. No hope. Only silence. Until starvation finally claimed her life. Or at least, that's what the legend says. And if the story ended there, none of us would be talking about Borley Rectory today. Because years later, people claimed she came back. Cliffhanger. The first person to see her wasn't a ghost hunter or a psychic. It was a group of innocent children. And what they witnessed inside the rectory would terrify an entire village for decades. If the legend was nothing more than an old ghost story, then what happened next should have been impossible. It was the summer of 1863. Borley Rectory had only recently been completed. The building still smelled of fresh timber and stone. To the villagers, it looked like the perfect home for the local rector and his family. Peaceful, quiet, almost welcoming. But appearances can be seriously deceiving. Every afternoon, neighborhood kids would gather around the property after school. They'd laugh, play tag, and race around the gardens without a second thought. The rectory was just another place to explore. Or so they believed. One ordinary afternoon, a group of children wandered into the east wing of the house. The moment they crossed the doorway, everything changed. The cheerful laughter stopped. The room felt wrong. The air suddenly turned ice cold. No breeze. No open windows. Just a heavy silence that seemed to swallow every sound. One of the children whispered, "Do you guys feel that?" Nobody answered. Because everyone felt it. That strange feeling. Like someone was standing behind you, watching every move you made. Still, curiosity got the better of them. Slowly, they stepped farther into the dark room. Then one of the children froze. "Wait. Who's that?" Across the room, near an old wooden wardrobe, a figure stood completely still. At first, they thought it was another person. Maybe one of the adults. Maybe someone cleaning the house. But something wasn't right. The figure wasn't walking. It wasn't breathing. It simply swayed, back and forth, almost like it wasn't touching the ground at all. Nobody dared speak. Nobody dared move. For several agonizing seconds, the room remained completely silent. Then, the figure stopped moving. It slowly turned its head, and looked directly at them. The children couldn't see its face clearly. Not yet. Only two dark eyes, staring without blinking. Then, it started coming toward them. Not walking, not running, gliding, completely silent. As it drifted closer, the sunlight spilling through the window finally illuminated its face. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a trick of the light. Standing before them was what looked like an elderly nun. Her face was unnaturally pale. Her skin stretched tightly across sharp cheekbones. Her eyes looked hollow, as if every ounce of life had been drained from them centuries ago. Long black robes hung loosely from her thin body. And then one child noticed something so horrifying, it would haunt them forever. She had no feet. The nun wasn't walking across the floor. She was floating. That's when absolute panic exploded. The children screamed at the top of their lungs. Some burst into tears. Others shoved each other trying to reach the doorway. Nobody looked back. They ran as if their lives depended on it. The rector heard the screams from his office and rushed toward the drawing room. When he arrived, he found every child huddled together outside, shaking uncontrollably, barely able to speak. Between sobs, they all described the exact same thing. A ghostly nun, floating through the room. Now here's the part that's really unsettling. These children came from different families, different ages, yet every single one of them described the same woman, the same black robes, the same hollow face, and the same terrifying detail. She never touched the ground. The rector tried calming them down. He insisted there had to be a logical explanation. Children had vivid imaginations. Maybe it was poor lighting. Maybe someone had frightened them, trying to prove there was nothing there. He walked back into the drawing room alone. The room was empty. No strange figure. No mysterious sounds. Nothing. He sighed in relief. Maybe the children really had imagined it. As he stepped back into the hallway, a loud, violent bang. The drawing room door slammed shut behind him with such force that the entire hallway echoed. He spun around immediately, his heart pounding. But when he opened the door again, the room was silent, completely empty. No wind, no open windows, no explanation. The rector never publicly admitted he was frightened, but according to those closest to him, he avoided that room whenever he could, because deep down, he knew something had answered him that day, and that encounter was only the beginning. For the next 37 years, the mysterious nun would appear again, and every new witness added another terrifying piece to the legend. But the next sighting would convince an entire village that Borley Rectory wasn't haunted by a story, it was haunted by something very real. For a while, life inside Borley Rectory seemed normal. The terrifying encounter with the ghostly nun slowly faded into local folklore. People stopped talking about it. The children grew up. New families moved in. And for decades, the house remained strangely quiet. Almost too quiet. Then, 37 years later, the silence was shattered. One afternoon, children were once again playing outside the rectory, laughing and chasing each other through the gardens. It felt like any other day, until one little girl suddenly stopped running. She was staring toward the edge of the property. Her face turned completely pale. "What is that?" The other kids followed her gaze. Standing between the trees was a woman dressed entirely in black. She didn't wave. She didn't move. She simply stood there, watching them. At first, they thought it was one of the local nuns. But something felt off. She looked unnaturally thin. Her face was ghost white. And despite standing in broad daylight, she seemed almost transparent. One brave boy called out, "Ma'am, are you okay?" No response. Instead, the figure slowly lifted her head. Then, without taking a single step, she began gliding toward them. Not walking, not running, floating, dead silent. The kids completely lost it. Some screamed. Others burst into tears. Everyone bolted in different directions. By the time the rector rushed outside, the mysterious woman had vanished. Gone. Like she'd never been there. Except, every child told the exact same story. Again. Same black robes. Same hollow face. Same impossible movement. And once again, no footprints. No evidence. Nothing. News spread through the village like wildfire. People who had laughed at the old legend suddenly weren't laughing anymore. Neighbors began avoiding the rectory after dark. Travelers refused to walk past the property alone. Some even claimed they had seen the mysterious nun standing near the windows late at night, watching silently from inside a room no one occupied. But the sightings weren't the only thing getting worse. Residents started reporting footsteps echoing through empty hallways. Doors opened by themselves. Heavy furniture shifted during the middle of the night. Bells rang without anyone touching them. And strange lights appeared inside rooms that had no electricity. Then came the whispers. People described hearing quiet voices just outside their bedroom doors. Whenever they opened the door, nobody was there. Just an empty hallway. And freezing cold air. Some nights, the whispers sounded like prayers. Other nights, like someone crying. The house no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied by something that didn't want company. Years later, another family moved into Borley Rectory, hoping all the ghost stories were nothing more than exaggerated rumors. They couldn't have been more wrong. Shortly after settling in, the wife was cleaning an old room that had been left untouched for years. In the far corner stood an antique wardrobe covered in dust. She slowly pulled the heavy doors open, expecting old clothes, maybe forgotten books. Instead, she found something that made her blood run cold. Hidden deep inside was a human skull. Not a fake one, a real skull. Authorities were called immediately. Experts examined the remains. They estimated the skull belonged to a young woman and had been there for nearly a century. No one could identify who she was. No one knew how she'd ended up inside that wardrobe. But here's where things get seriously creepy. The moment the skull was removed from the property, the haunting exploded, almost as if whatever had been sleeping inside the house had just been disturbed. Footsteps echoed every single night. Windows slammed shut without warning. Shadow figures crossed hallways in broad daylight. Witnesses reported seeing an old horse-drawn carriage rolling silently through the courtyard, only for it to disappear into thin air. Objects vanished, only to reappear days later in impossible places. People were waking up with scratches they couldn't explain. And some residents claimed they felt invisible hands tugging at their clothes while they slept. At this point, Borley Rectory wasn't just a creepy old house anymore. It had become a nightmare. The family realized they couldn't handle it alone, so they contacted the newspapers. They hoped someone, anyone, could explain what was happening. They had no idea. Their story was about to attract the attention of the most famous paranormal investigator in Britain. A man whose investigation would make Borley Rectory legendary and uncover secrets buried for centuries. Cliffhanger. Because when Harry Price stepped inside Borley Rectory, the house didn't stay quiet. It welcomed him. And what happened next would become one of the most controversial paranormal investigations in history. By now, Borley Rectory had become the kind of place people whispered about. Some called it cursed. Others believed it was a gateway. A place where the line between the living and the dead had somehow disappeared. But there was one man who wasn't interested in rumors. He wanted proof. His name, Harry Price. At the time, Price was Britain's most famous paranormal investigator. Some people respected him. Others thought he was nothing more than a showman chasing headlines. But regardless of what people believed, if there was a haunted house anywhere in England, Harry Price would eventually show up. And Borley Rectory was now at the top of his list. The moment Harry stepped onto the property, he claimed something felt different. Not fear. Not excitement. Just an overwhelming feeling. Like someone was silently watching every move he made. Still, he refused to jump to conclusions. He brought cameras, scientific instruments, notebooks, measuring equipment. If this house was truly haunted, he intended to document every single detail. At first, nothing happened. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The house remained eerily quiet. Some members of the investigation team even started joking. Maybe the ghosts took the day off. Everyone laughed. Then, crash. A pane of glass exploded from an upstairs window. It missed Harry by only a few inches. The team sprinted inside, believing someone must have thrown it. They searched every room, every hallway, every staircase. Nobody. No broken window frame. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. Then, before anyone could process what had just happened, another object came flying through the air. This time, it shot past one investigator's head so fast, he actually felt the wind brush against his face. The laughter stopped instantly. No one joked anymore, because whatever was inside that house had just acknowledged them. Over the following weeks, the activity only intensified. Investigators heard footsteps following them through empty corridors. Doors slammed on their own. Heavy furniture shifted overnight. Lights appeared inside abandoned rooms. And then came something far more disturbing. Messages. Words began appearing on the walls. Not carved, Not painted. Simply appearing. Some were impossible to understand. Others seemed like desperate cries for help. One message kept repeating over and over. Find me. That was it. Just 2 words. Simple. Yet absolutely chilling. Harry couldn't ignore it. If someone, or something, wanted to be found, he intended to find out why. The investigation soon focused on an old stone well hidden on the property. It had been abandoned for generations. According to local legends, it was connected to the oldest part of the estate. Workers began carefully digging around the site. Hours passed. Nothing. Some investigators were ready to give up. Then one worker's shovel struck something solid. Not rock. Bone. The team carefully uncovered what appeared to be human remains. Everyone froze. Some believed they'd finally uncovered the missing nun from the centuries-old legend. Others argued the remains could have belonged to anyone. There was no definitive proof. But one thing was certain. Finding those remains seemed to awaken something inside Borley Rectory. Because after that day, the house became violent. Objects no longer simply moved. They were thrown. Chairs slid across empty rooms. Heavy books launched from shelves. Windows shattered without warning. Investigators reported being shoved by invisible hands. Several claimed they heard someone whisper directly into their ears, only to turn around and find nobody standing there. One woman suddenly screamed in terror after feeling icy fingers wrap around her wrist. When the others rushed over, they found deep red marks already forming on her skin. Nobody could explain how they appeared. And perhaps the creepiest part of all, most of these incidents happened while multiple witnesses were present. Not one. Not two. Entire groups watched impossible events unfold together. Whatever haunted Borley Rectory, it wasn't hiding anymore. It wanted to be seen. Then, a local medium visited the property. During one late-night session, she suddenly stopped speaking. Her breathing became slow. Her face turned completely pale. When she finally opened her eyes, she whispered something that made the entire room go silent. She claimed she was speaking with the spirit of a woman trapped on the property. According to her, the restless soul had one final warning. The rectory would soon burn. Most people dismissed it as another dramatic prediction. But less than a year later, the impossible happened. Late one evening, a single oil lamp was accidentally knocked over. Within minutes, flames raced through the old wooden building. Neighbors watched helplessly as the fire consumed room after room. The legendary Borley Rectory was reduced to ashes. Many believed the nightmare had finally come to an end. They couldn't have been more wrong, because even after the building disappeared, the sightings never stopped. In fact, some witnesses claimed the ghostly nun became even easier to see. Cliffhanger. Years later, 2 of the world's most famous paranormal investigators would arrive at the abandoned site. What they experienced there would inspire one of the most terrifying horror characters ever created. And according to Lorraine Warren, it was something she never forgot. Most people assumed the nightmare ended the moment Borley Rectory burned to the ground. After all, no house, no haunting. Right? Wrong. Because sometimes, destroying the building doesn't destroy whatever lives inside it. In fact, many believed it only set it free. After the fire, construction crews arrived to clear away the ruins. They expected long days of hard labor. What they didn't expect was becoming part of the legend themselves. Workers reported hearing footsteps walking across piles of rubble. Even when everyone was accounted for, tools disappeared, only to be found exactly where they'd been searched moments earlier. Some claimed they saw a woman dressed in black standing at the edge of the property. Whenever they looked directly at her, she vanished. One worker even quit after his very first day. He refused to explain why. He simply packed his things, looked back at the ruins one last time, and said, "That place doesn't want us here." But the strangest part? The sightings didn't stay with the ruins. People began reporting paranormal activity around the old church beside the rectory. Visitors claimed they felt an overwhelming heaviness the moment they stepped inside. Some heard whispers. Others described cold spots that appeared out of nowhere. And a few insisted they had seen a ghostly nun silently walking through the churchyard at dusk, only to disappear before reaching the gates. The legend refused to die. If anything, it was growing stronger. Then, years later, 2 names entered the story. Names every horror fan knows. Ed and Lorraine Warren. By then, the Warrens had investigated some of the world's most famous paranormal cases. Very little shocked them anymore. But Borley was different. According to those close to the family, The moment Lorraine entered the church, she froze. She later described feeling an overwhelming presence. Something ancient, something deeply unsettling. Not angry, not violent, just watching, as if it had been waiting for someone to acknowledge it. Ed reportedly admitted that the atmosphere inside the church was unlike anything he had experienced before. The silence felt heavy, almost alive. Even simple sounds, like footsteps, echoed in ways that didn't make sense. Neither of them claimed to have all the answers, but both walked away convinced something unexplained had touched that place. And here's where the story takes one final twist. Several years later, Lorraine experienced something terrifying inside her own home. Late one night, she sensed a strange presence in the room. When she looked up, she described seeing what appeared to be a swirling black mass, darker than the surrounding darkness. It hovered silently, watching her. Lorraine immediately ordered it to leave, and just as suddenly as it appeared, it disappeared. She never claimed with certainty that it was the same entity connected to Borley, but many paranormal researchers believe that experience, combined with the haunting surrounding the mysterious nun, helped inspire one of the most terrifying characters ever brought to the big screen. The nun, not a direct copy of history, but a character born from decades of ghost stories, eyewitness accounts, legends, and unexplained encounters that continue to spark debate even today. So, was Borley Rectory truly the most haunted house in England? Were generations of witnesses all experiencing the same unexplained phenomenon? Or did fear, folklore, and imagination slowly transform an ordinary building into one of history's greatest paranormal legends? No one knows for sure, because despite decades of investigations, hundreds of witness statements, and countless theories, Borley Rectory never gave anyone a final answer, only more questions. And maybe that's what makes the story so terrifying, not knowing, because the scariest monsters are often the ones we can never fully explain. Even today, visitors still report strange experiences near the former site. Some hear footsteps, some feel they're being watched, and every now and then, someone claims to catch a glimpse of a silent woman in black, standing perfectly still, before fading into the darkness. Maybe it's just another ghost story, or maybe some legends never really end. If you enjoyed this terrifying deep dive into one of history's most infamous haunted locations, hit that like button. Subscribe for more true horror stories, paranormal mysteries, and unexplained cases. And remember, the next time you hear footsteps behind you, make sure they're actually yours. Until next time, sleep tight, if you can.